Good evening and welcome to another Mothman podcast. We are your number one source for sci-fi and paranormal podcasts. Also be listening for podcasts from Moth and Flame. You'll be hearing about hypnotherapy and mediumship.
And also, please like and subscribe and comment on YouTube. Follow us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Instagram, Twitter, and more. And you can find out a lot more about our services on mothmanpodcast.com.
Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Mothman Podcast. Tonight we're going to be talking about ghosts relating to schools. Also, I'm going to give a question that was presented to us in email. I appreciate everybody emailing us. Don't forget that you got Mothman Podcast at gmail.com. Be sure to send in your request for either a question or a topic that you want us to research and do for you, and we'd be more happy to do that for you. The first question for tonight is that what does the word ghost really mean? And they wanted me to ask each one of our members of the podcast what their perception of what does ghost really mean to you. And what does that mean, Bruce?
To me, ghost is the general term, just kind of like spirit, because ghost, it can be divided into categories. I mean, you have poltergeist, which actually have enough energy to move objects. You have residual hauntings, where it's basically a non-intelligent spirit, where kind of trapped in a loop where it'll repeat and go through a same process every time it manifests. You have intelligent hauntings that, when you do EVPs and spirit boxes, you can get intelligent responses and answers to questions that you ask. So to me, ghost is just one of the general broad terms that kind of encompasses it, but doesn't really specify what it is.
Candace, what's your definition?
What he said.
Me too.
What he said.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of directions you can take that question.
Well, yeah, I completely disagree. Because I go back to where the root word is Geist, the German, and it literally just meant the spirit of a person. So I don't consider a poltergeist a ghost.
No, I'm just saying ghost is like the general term for spirit.
I wouldn't use
overall.
I wouldn't use it for an overall term. I would only use it for the haunting by the spirit of a human being or an animal.
Okay, so what she said.
Yeah. Now that I do believe, like when you said ghost being a human being spirit, absolutely. Because demons are not human spirits.
Right, but poltergeists aren't either. They're not a spirit, even though it has the word geist, it means noisy spirit. It still is not.
But they were human at one point.
No, well,
poltergeists are human spirits.
No, they're not.
They're angry.
I'm serious. Look it up because what they are.
So who defines the definition by you saying look it up? Who would define the definition?
Define that? It would be the classical definition. I don't think you can take a modern ghost hunter definition or a TV definition. And I'm not saying you are, Bruce. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying, I remember when I was a kid, first introduced to the idea of poltergeist. And it is not a disembodied human spirit. It's not a human at all. It is the energy usually put forth by a human being who is living. So that's why they say, well, when you have a poltergeist, you always end up with a teenage female, usually female, not always, but it's a teenage female living person who is putting off that energy and is wrecking things just in a physical sense. It's almost telekinesis, but it's not telekinesis because they're not even aware of it.
But see, I have to disagree with that because
that's the definition.
But the YouTube user Mellowbird, he's a 33-year-old guy, lives in Germany in an apartment by himself, and he actually posted one of the most popular videos on the internet of poltergeist,
Well, then it
opening
would be a
stuff in his
ghost.
cabinets and stuff. And the EVPs that he's done with that spirit, it's like an angry
And
man.
see, EVPs can't be done with a poltergeist because it's the energy from a living human. So there's a definition of what the poltergeist actually is, and it's the noisy spirit. And whenever they looked at why do we have poltergeist activity, go ahead, look it up.
Okay, but now we're still getting back to the word ghost. So you're saying that the word ghost can mean a lot of things.
I'm saying it cannot mean a lot of things.
And Bruce is saying it can.
Yeah.
Okay, now I understand.
I'm very specific. When I say ghost, I definitely mean the spirit of a dead human being.
Okay.
So where did the word ghost
I'm
come from?
going to look
Start
at
with.
German, Geist.
The actual definition says an apparition of a dead person which is believed to appear or become manifest to the living, typically as a nebulous image.
Now you
Source.
define ghost or poltergeist.
What's your source?
The Merriam-Webster's dictionary.
Yeah, Merriam-Webster's is the worst dictionary known to mankind. Yeah, pick a different one.
Alrighty. Let's find a different
Okay, we're going for a different one. Okay, now
Okay, poltergeist. A ghost or supernatural being supposedly responsible for physical disturbances such as loud noises and objects thrown around.
Okay, that's not specific enough. I would encourage you to look into it further.
Dictionary.com says the soul of a dead person, a disembodied spirit.
That's the Merriam-Webster's.
Is it?
yep, same thing.
Okay.
It's the same thing.
Next.
Oxford's
Dictionary.
English Dictionary has a good dictionary. I'm not
Here's the
saying
Cambridge
dictionary
one.
has what we understand, but I'm just telling you that in classical
Cambridge
studies,
Dictionary says basically the same thing.
that it has.
So does Collins Dictionary.
Well, I'm going to go with the German then.
Okay, now
That's fascinating.
so just like the movie Ghost, you know, it's built off of spirit. Banging when you're walking up the steps, like you mentioned prior to our podcast, you were talking about an individual who heard footsteps up a step. That's a ghost. So,
As far as we know.
as far as we know, and so I was just trying to interpret what this individual is
Well,
asking us.
here's what
and
I
I'm
would-
saying that he's just wanting to know. We keep talking about ghosts and we talk about paranormal. How do we classify paranormal, ghost, UFOs, all this?
Differentiate
Exactly.
between-
Okay.
They all fall under the word paranormal. As far we'll call it that. I don't even want to go into my own personal theories.
Why not? Go ahead.
Well, my own personal theories is that the paranormal is not para, it's only normal. And I mean, you've said that yourself.
I agree. I agree with that statement.
Yeah,
now.
and so like when I'm a part of this group that does critical thinking, and most of them, almost probably 99%, do not believe in ghosts. And they have asked me, like, how could you believe in ghosts and also be a critical thinker? And my answer is that I don't think this is supernatural or paranormal. I think it is a natural phenomenon that we can't explain as of yet.
Right.
So, like what Bruce calls, I would call those hauntings. But a ghost itself, I would only call, because ghost comes from the word Geist or spirit, and it was intended to mean the spirit of a human being. So I'm really specific with it.
Right. And from what the research I've done, 48%, almost 50% of the population, 48% is what it actually is, believes in ghosts or believes in paranormal entities.
Yeah.
I've got away from using the word ghost, and I stick more with paranormal because I'm like you. Para, I can take away the normal,
Right.
And I think it's just the way we perceive it and accept it is our norm. You know, might not be somebody else's norm,
Right.
might not be your mother's norm,
Yeah.
but it is. You know, it is an entity out there. It's an unexplainable entity out there.
Right.
There's no science to back up ghost.
No.
There's nothing to prove that there really are ghosts
Right.
scientifically, but there's nothing scientifically to prove they're not ghosts.
Exactly.
So there we go again.
Yeah.
Which right hand or left hand is how you
And
look at
even
it.
though it's what like a scientist or whatever would call it, would be like anecdotal evidence. I'm okay with that because the anecdotes that I have personally seen make me believe this. So I know that I've seen ghosts, so I believe it. And the only word that I really, really stay away from is supernatural, because I think it's misunderstood in just kind of in general. It's used too much to mean anything from God to Satan to a ghost or whatever.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Supernatural kind of leans into the mythological parts.
Well, and most people look at supernatural, they look at science fiction TV.
Yeah.
Okay. They're looking more into the, Superman.
Yeah, supernatural is more of the lore.
Right.
So it's
Right.
I mean, your supernatural covers everything from like Wendigos to
Cartoons on Saturday morning.
I mean, even the chupacabra. You know,
Yeah.
like it's not exactly. It's not the same thing.
Yeah. And I don't like it for the same reason that I'm kind of iffy on paranormal. I think you're right. Paranormal is kind of the best word we have, but supernatural, I don't think these things are outside of what's natural or what's normal. And I think more people than not experience these things, and like we found, are reluctant to come forward to talk about it or admit that they've actually seen it. They'll tell us, but they'll tell us as in,
hey, don't
tell anybody.
Yeah, don't tell anybody. And it's going back to the old, you speak to everybody, do you believe in this? And, oh no, but one time in my life I did see, blah, 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 blah. So it's always somebody's out there in the norm, but they just don't want to recognize it as the
Right,
norm.
right.
They don't want to believe that, especially those that, and I say this personally, I'm not saying it as this podcast. I'm not saying it as anybody else in this room, but I just think that religion is full of so many different thoughts and I guess beliefs that we really don't know what's right and what's wrong anymore. We don't know what's up and what's down. Mm-hmm. It's their perception of what took place, and that's man now,
right?
Because the writing of the Bible is an interpretation by man.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's true, and I'm not saying it's false. So I don't want to get a bunch of emails saying that I'm anti-religious because that's not true. I'm just saying it's just like the paranormal. You can't prove it's right and you can't prove it's wrong. Although I'm sure there's a lot of ministers out there that would bing me up against the wall and say, I can't prove this. Now, and I'm saying, okay, you can prove it by how?
Right.
Okay, I mean,
because Bible proves
because
Bible.
the Bible is the last word.
Yeah.
Okay. Whether that's true or not, that's just your own belief. I just believe that it's just like everything else. There's a lot of stuff out there we can't explain.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that will back us up. If you want to throw that one out there, I can say Bible. I can use the Bible to prove what I'm saying is true also. Mm-hmm. So, it's an interpretation of the writings of the Bible, and it's an interpretation of what you believe. So, John, I hope this answered your question on ghosts, because we kind of got a little bit heavy on this thing right now. But I think we're in all.
I think we need to do a podcast on what are they called? I can't think of the word. Noisy ghosts.
Poltergeist. So that's John. That's your answer to ghost. If it didn't fulfill what you needed, please be more specific and just write us down. And I know that's like Atlantic, but
specific.
That's my Southern drawl on it.
The Mothman grammar lesson.
It is what it is, and that's my North Carolina version of it. So please write and let us know if this.
And ask us more questions we can disagree on.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and it's not disagreeing. It's here again. It's
debate,
friendly
debate.
Yeah, it's our perception on what we think that is true, and nobody can prove us right, and nobody can prove us wrong. It's just the way it is. So, with that being said, I'm going to get with Candace, and tonight you're going to be talking about a school here in around Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and some of the things that you have seen, heard, and been told, at that school. So we'll just get into your episode with
All right.
Ghost in Schools.
Well, if you've listened at all in the last couple of weeks, when I joined in, Mandy introduced me. We were best friends in high school, and we went to an all-girls boarding school. It's actually the oldest girls' school in the country. And there were a lot of lore and stories when we were there. And when I joined on here, it got me thinking about there. And so I started talking to some former classmates and alum from both the college and the academy, and started asking people, did you ever have any weird experiences? And I just left it at weird. And I said, you can define that however you want. I hesitate to use the word haunted, but you know where I'm going with this. Give me what you got. And I received way more messages than I did actual comments on it. But basically, every single person who wrote me had a story. Well, they wouldn't have written me if they didn't have a story, I guess. But I mean, there were like 30 different people that responded to this, and they all had stories themselves, or they had stories that other students had told them that they had experienced. And so it was enough that it made me think, all right, well, let's actually dig into this and see what we can find about Salem and the school and the history and the lores and whatnot that are associated with that school. So Salem was founded as a actual school in 1772, but Mandy actually discovered that they were formed even earlier than that, in 1766 was it? Mm-hmm. And that it was just sort of a finishing school for girls at that point. So they taught sewing and cooking and girl stuff. That's not trying to be gender biased in any way. If anyone says anything,
different times.
Exactly.
And these girls lived in the single sister's house from like an early age, and there was the single brother's house. And so, I mean, that was the division already, and so they just kind of started teaching these girls the embroidery and everything.
And so apparently in 1772, they decided that they wanted the older girls who were like 12 and up to actually learn to read, learn some math, be educated. So that was when the school opened up. And pretty much from the word go, there were strange things afoot, shall we say. So what I have found, there were all kinds of stories all around the place. One of the traditions that they had at the academy and the college, and we didn't experience this because we were day students, so we didn't live on campus. But the boarding students, apparently the beginning, they no longer do this, but the beginning of each year up until about 2000, they would do an ice cream party there's an amphitheater behind the school. It's where the graduations take place, and it's just a nice
it's like an outdoor theater.
Yeah, it's just an outdoor amphitheater.
A creek that runs through the back of it.
And so there's stories about entities in the amphitheater. And that was one of the first ones that I came across, was a story of, because this intrigued me. I was familiar with the story of the, quote, woman in white that walked the halls of the first and second floor dormitory at Salem Academy. Every single girl I knew that lived at that school saw her. Everyone saw her. If you spent the night at that school for more than like a week, you probably saw this woman. And it was commonplace enough that people weren't creeped out by it. In fact, there were people trying to figure out if it was actually one of the teachers or something like that, that was messing with them. But it was the same person, the same entity that they saw year after year after year. And so this woman in white that supposedly haunts the dormitory there at Salem Academy, I tend to think that this spirit that they're talking about with the Maydale is what they call the amphitheater. There's a woman in white that supposedly appears in the Maydale. And I'm thinking it's probably the same one because she's described exactly the same as wearing a long white dress. She's transparent. Her hair is down past her knees. And she's relatively she's just there. She doesn't interact with people. She doesn't really acknowledge people at all, but hundreds of girls have seen her. And they used to have this tradition, apparently, where they would do an ice cream party on the opening weekend of school, and everyone would meet at the Maydale for this ice cream party, and they would just tell the ghost stories of the campus. And apparently they stopped doing it when some of the younger students started getting really, really freaked out by it, and we're realizing, okay, you know, our parents are in another country.
It's those millennials.
They just couldn't hang. But so there's a story of the woman in white that haunts the Maydell, and she just walks the stairs up and down at the amphitheater. Again, doesn't interact with anyone. Mandy mentioned the creek, though, that runs behind it. There's this little stone bridge that goes over the creek, and there is a black orb entity that resides kind of like the troll underneath the bridge. And it does interact with people. I remember the bridge only in the daytime because I was never there at night. But it was darker. It was just darker, if that makes sense, in that area of the woods. And
so no street lights or anything like that in that area?
No, not at all.
No. Definitely a really great place to get attacked or something. You know, they're seriously thinking about it now that you mention it. It is an all-girls school. They really need to work on that. Because it'd be really easy. So we've got the woman in the white, and you know, like I said, she's relatively friendly by comparison. In one of the dorms on the college side of the campus, the dorm is called Clewell, Clewell. A young girl supposedly fell down an elevator shaft in that building and was killed. And she has now been spotted in the halls late at night. She steals toys and stuffed animals from the dorm rooms, and people have found, you know, just random toys and stuff piled up in piles and just random places in this building, and they attribute it to her. She knocks stuff off of people's desks, and she's been heard supposedly just yelling for help in the building. Another one that I found was the Gramley building, which is the library at Salem College. Now, if anyone who wants to, I guess, could probably go in that library. The third floor of that library has, I don't care what anybody says, there is an evil presence on the third floor of that library. And there is a lot of different stories about what has supposedly happened there. There were stories that girls were killed in an electrocution accident right after the building was built. There are spirits of two girls that are just screaming for help. And you just hear these voices coming from the back of the stacks, you know, just screaming for help. And you think somebody's being attacked. You go back there and no one's there. The Fine Arts Center on campus. This I found particularly interesting because I actually knew about this. This is one of the few stories that I'm able to validate with proof that this really did happen. There in the late 90s was a woman who was just seeing a play there, and she apparently passed away of a heart attack during the play, and everything was quite medicinal. You know, the ambulance came, took her out. It wasn't anything weird or, you know, sketchy about her death, but that theater now, there are claims that there is a woman now that haunts that theater, and that at night sometimes you can hear someone clapping in there, but there's no one there. In that same building, and I know this to be true because I experienced this myself, there is a piano that plays by itself. You hear piano music playing. You go to the rehearsal rooms. There's no one there. The auditoriums. There's no one there.
That actually happened to me. Do you remember? I'll tell you her name later, but it's one of the Rebeccas we knew. Mm-hmm. We were just messing around down there, and we heard the piano playing and went in there, and it stopped as soon as we opened the door. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was really, we were just like, what just happened?
And they attribute that to a couple of the piano players who worked with the choral groups at the school, because once again, those choruses, they're the longest running all-female choir in the country. And so they've had several pianists that worked with them throughout the years. And so they attribute that to one of the pianists. But she's experienced it. I've experienced it. One of the Rebeccas.
Yeah.
Mikiv?
No, it's not her.
Oh, well, okay. So the other one, she experienced it too.
Yeah.
And so there's weird things like that go on. And one of the other stories that I was able to actually confirm to be true, let me pull up my notes on that real quick. There was a girl from Georgia, and her name was, I believe it was Sally. It was very plain like that. Yes, Sally. Her parents apparently visited the school and decided that it was a good fit for their daughter. And this was in 1873. So she came to the school and started she was there for music is what it boils down to. She spent the summer of 1873 with her parents and then returned to Salem for her fall term. And on Friday, November 28th, 1873, she got sick. She got the flu. Well, a flu, some nature of disease like that. She died there on campus is what it boils down to. She died there on campus. Okay. I'm looking at all my notes and I'm not finding it. Tilly, that was her last name, Sally Tilly. And so she was practicing the piano one night, and this was, in the 1800s, so it wasn't like, we had light bulbs. A ember popped up off of a candle, and it caught the bottom of her dress, and she didn't realize it until she was fully engulfed in flames. And the story says that she ran from the upstairs piano room that she was working in downstairs to where the rest of the school body, when the people were trying to screaming, someone help, help, help. And by the time she got to the bottom floor where the people actually were, and they started trying to put the fire out on her, she had passed. So you have supposedly screams that are heard coming from that piano room. And that's the one story that is proven, that they have news articles about, documented news articles, and they've still got, her school records and stuff like that there.
Oh, it's so sad. What a horrible way to die.
Yeah, really.
I'm guessing Stop, Drop, and Roll hadn't been invented.
Yeah, Stop, Drop, and Roll wasn't around in 1873.
And I've seen some things on the way people died a lot during that time period, and there's a whole documentary on it. And women often died from their dresses catching fire because they were pure 100% cotton.
It started to say that was the material they used. They used a lot of it was from feed sacks. When they got their feed in, they would put, it wasn't burlap, it was just
flour sacks.
Yeah, they would use this colorful material, and that's what they would put the feed in. And then after a while, everybody started making their dresses, so they started, putting more and more colorful material out there. But I understand that stuff was very flammable.
Yeah.
So.
What a horrible way to go.
Yeah.
Well, another one of the creepy stories, and this is one of my favorite ones, is R.J. Reynolds' daughter went to Salem. And so Mary Babcock, and they named a dorm after her eventually. But there's a portrait of her in the building. And I've seen the portrait. I never necessarily felt like the eyes were following me. But apparently the vast majority of people feel like the eyes of Mary Babcock's portrait in Babcock Hall
creeped me out.
Follows you as you, pardon me, microphone. Follows you as you walk. I talk with my hands a lot, people, okay?
She is definitely talking with her hands.
Yeah, I can't help it. I got some Italian in me or something. And so I found that one very interesting as well. There are also stories of two girls who hung themselves in one of the dorms on campus, and they supposedly, after this happened, it was an attic type apartment, I guess, in one of the dorms. They no longer let anybody live in that dormitory. I mean, in that room. They've just sort of closed it off, and people aren't allowed in there anymore. And I talked to a couple of girls that went to college there and lived in those dorms, and they said that it was stop with, you want to talk about the difference in ghost and poltergeist, Salem's probably a perfect place for that, because one girl I spoke with said that it was just nonstop, that she would wake up in the morning and stuff that was on one table, for instance, or on one desk had been moved to another, and no one else did it. Stuff had been knocked out into the floor. She said that she used to wake up all the time to someone tapping her neck.
Oh, creepy.
Yeah.
I would not like that.
That was a story that I heard a lot from the girls there that said that they would wake up in the middle of the night to a voice talking to them or to someone tapping on a shoulder or their neck or their head. It was always above. That's weird. I just realized that it was always above the neck.
Wow.
But yeah, like I said, I had about 30 different people message me, and their stories were pretty much all the same stories.
Can I tell the story about the one that we both remembered?
Yeah.
So it was really weird. Candace and I were talking about school, and she's like, did I dream this, or did this really happen? Because this has been bothering me for years, and I don't know if it was a dream or not. And she tells me the story, and I'm like, I wasn't sure if that was a dream or not. So we had this similar experience, but it felt really foggy to both of us. But basically what happened, Thursday afternoons, we had 2 hours that we were supposed to be studying or visiting teachers for help. Candace and I did not often do that.
No, I never did that.
I think I did it once. But yeah, so we were always they knew us for getting into trouble together. And so we were like, well, let's explore the school. Where have we not looked? And so we started going down different corridors that we were unfamiliar with. And the school is actually bigger on the inside than it looks.
It really is.
And so we ended up in the attic. There's girls that live in the attic. And so it's still dorm rooms. It's still carpeted floor and everything. And then we saw this other door. We go through that door. And then there's a weird staircase that shot up with nothing on each side. It just kind of went up to another wooden door, and we were like, what the heck is this? So we went up there and opened it, and it was the actual attic. So it was like the top of the building, and we just kind of looked around, and it's kind of hazy, dusty kind of looking in there. And then we saw this orb come up from the floor and just float all the way down to the end of the it's like a really long attic. So it goes all the way to the end of the attic and outside.
Like it just went through the wall.
Yeah.
Completely.
Exactly. So up through the floor and then just kind of floated past us, like it came up in front of us, and then all the way down to our left and just went out through the wall. And for some reason, we never talked about it.
Never.
We just closed the door and walked away. And literally until last week, we never talked about it to each other. And then Candace was like, do you remember that? That was a weird paranormal kind of thing that happened.
Because I honestly thought that I thought I had dreamed it up somehow over the years. I really thought it was something that I had created in my head, and that didn't really happen. And when I mentioned it to her, and she was like, oh my gosh, I thought I dreamed that too. And I was like, okay, well, we both didn't dream the same thing, so that clearly happened.
Yeah, it was just really odd. But, we never talked about it. We never saw anything like that again, as far as I know. I mean, there were places that were creepy. I was telling her I felt like the chapel really creeped me out, but she felt it was very comforting.
Yeah, I used to go in there and take naps.
But it did feel like there was a presence of some sort.
There was a presence in there, but I never felt it to be anything bad in any way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now Mandy actually came up with some stories, found some stories.
I found a few more
associated with the area, not necessarily with the buildings themselves, but
so I know, one girl that I knew back when we were in high school together, she had told me that she saw this Civil War looking guy who was transparent, and she wasn't sure if she really saw him at first. And so the image only stayed there very briefly, but she was walking down the hall and sees this guy standing there and then kind of blinks and he's gone. And so she was telling me about it later, and she's like, I don't know what that was. And I was like, I don't know either, but I wouldn't want to be sleeping here.
Yeah. And men weren't allowed in the building either. So,
nope.
Another thing that I was told by a friend who was going to call in, and he unfortunately had to work, but he used to work there in the kitchen. And I thought at first that some old ladies were probably just messing with him, but he said that the older ladies in the kitchen told him that there was an entity in the kitchen that would periodically just hurl plates across the kitchen, and that did that every now and then, that it didn't happen often, but every now and then they'd all be working or something, and a fork or something would just go flying through the air, that something would knock something off in that kitchen. And he said that he experienced it once. And he said they all turned around and ran outside and just kind of walked away from it. It was like, nope. He said, I said, I'm done cooking for these little girls.
And the kitchen dates back, as far back as the early 1800s when the building was built. And they did use slaves there early on. The Moravians stopped doing that pretty quickly, however, because it kind of went against their beliefs. So they were one of the first groups to dispense with slavery, which I think was a good thing.
Will you tell them about the Little Red Man? Because that was a story I wasn't familiar with. But
didn't they tear down the building, though, where the Little Red Man was?
He's been seen all over Old Salem. All I know about him, and I don't know his story in depth.
He was a shoemaker, wasn't he?
That's what I thought.
Cobbler. Mm-hmm.
Yes, he was a cobbler, and he was a little fellow. I'm not sure what the
little person, a
little
dwarf.
person. Okay,
a dwarf.
And he always wore this red suit, and he was a cobbler, and he was also kind of a tricky, like, play jokes on people type of guy. And
he also liked to get handsy with women.
Yes, little handsy with the ladies. And since he was the right height, so but he's been seen in several of the what do you call it? Kind of like the basement area in a lot of the buildings. But I know he's been seen as far as the academy and college. And several other buildings. So I don't know. He's a really interesting one. Really deserves almost his own show.
Now, one of the things about Salem too, though, is that right directly across from the academy is one of, I think all Moravians probably call their graveyards God's Acre.
Yeah,
there's
do.
multiple God's Acres, but is the big God's Acre downtown.
They're all God's Acres.
Yes. And so there's a very, very, very large graveyard that's right directly across the driveway
but
from
I think
the
it
school.
is the second oldest, isn't it? Because Bethabara is the oldest, and then Salem is the second. Yeah,
and so you got to figure that probably stirs up a lot of stuff. But I am most intrigued by, frankly, it's the oldest one and it's probably the cheesiest one, but by the Lady in White, only because so many people have claimed to see her, and that's not the sort of thing that people just go around just being like, hey, guess what I did last night? I saw a ghost. It's just it's not the sort of thing that people.
No, there were so many
once
girls
you mention
that
it to
saw
someone, I was talking to other day students too, and they said all the boarders that they knew saw her. And so there's got to be something there. I don't know what exactly, but there's got to be something there because there are generations of girls that have seen this entity.
Yeah.
So there's something to it.
There we go again with things that you can't prove.
That's right.
You can't,
but Candace mentioned the cemetery across it's not even a street. It's just a little alley where we park. And the cemetery is really huge. It's really interesting. There's some important families like the Reynolds families. They're almost all buried there. But we were forbidden. We were told on the first day that we came onto campus, you are not to go into the cemetery, period. And everybody's like, well, why? I mean, we're kids. We're saying why. And, then I had a teacher kind of tell a small group of us, it is because in the 1970s, there were girls performing witchcraft rituals in the cemetery. And obviously, we do not want you engaging in that. And so you're not allowed into the cemetery. So there were always still girls that snuck over there, but
that would be me.
Well, it's a beautiful cemetery.
It is a beautiful cemetery. It's
but
very
there
peaceful.
there's a lot of activity in that cemetery. I know people have seen lights. They might be orbs. I'm not real sure.
Is that a public cemetery or is that a?
Yes.
It is. Yes.
You can go there until sundown.
I've seen the lights.
Oh, you can't be in there at nighttime?
You're not supposed to be in there after something. Well, I mean, you're not supposed to. You can, but you're not supposed to. Just don't get caught. I've been there plenty of times after dark.
I know, but it's kind of hard to do an investigation in there and not be caught.
Not get caught. But I have to tell you, I've gone in there during the day with, it's a little gadget that kind of shows if there's any kind of electrical magnetic activity. And me and two friends went, and we saw a couple of different things that it's like, not sure what that is, but it's showing that there is electrical activity over that grave, and there's no, light source or anything like that around. So I found that interesting. I've always wanted to explore it more, but I'm not sure if it's possible.
One of the reasons I was in there at night was I saw the little lights that people had mentioned, and I thought, in my head, okay, well, I'm going to prove them wrong. This is just a solar light someone has stuck out there, and it's dark now, so there's a little light out there. And
Bruce, why don't you take a SLS camera in there?
I went out there and checked it out, and there were no solar lights. The lights disappeared before I got to where they were.
Oh my God!
The SLS camera doesn't work well in wide open spaces.
It's not very wide open.
No, it's actually
there's lots of walls.
A lot of mausoleums and stuff there too.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Do they have any high? I guess what I'm saying. Do they have any gravestones that are other than flat on the ground?
Yes, most of them are. Actually,
the tall ones is the ones you have to use.
They have a whole wall that is it's like a gate kind of thing. That it's a mausoleum, but they're all built into this wall. And so there's I don't know. There's
a bunch of them.
6 to 10. I'm not sure.
We just make some cameras in there and see if we get any orbs running around there.
Yeah. And there is a legend of a parson from the Moravians who supposedly walks the graveyard at night and is more of a negative presence. But I don't know if that is still like an active thing that people have seen or not. But
I know that they still got that gravestone in there where if you knock on it, supposedly the ghost will follow you home and whatnot. But
I went and looked at it. I didn't knock on it.
I'm not all about knocking on it either.
I don't know. This comes from the guy that takes toys into his house that are haunted.
That's different.
Are they
that's
still
an
in the
object.
garage?
I can't take a tombstone home with me. And I don't. It's like if he's in the graveyard, just leave him in the graveyard. He's already where he needs to be.
That's right. That's right.
Have you moved stuff back into the house yet?
Actually, that's what I was going to do tonight.
Okay. I've got one story I wanted to put on the podcast. It comes from a individual named Doug from Charlotte, North Carolina. And Doug, I hope I do justice to your story. I'm going from memory now. I didn't bring my notes with me, but I'm going from memory. But we got
we'll just enjoy the music.
Running.
It's just a lovely tune.
Distraction provided by Mothman.
Well, he's got to do something to keep us on our toes.
That's right. But anyway, Doug, this story goes back to the 1960s, so it's not like a 1800 story. It's a 60s story. And Doug was in high school.
That was before any of us were born.
Well, yeah, that's true. It was going back in the dark ages, wasn't it? He had a girlfriend by the name of Shirley, and Shirley was very talented. She had a great voice, and it was going towards the end of the school year at East Mecklenburg High School in Charlotte. And she was in charge of putting together a talent show for the school. They had a talent show at the end of each year, and she was in the process of doing interviews, and she was doing directions for I guess for the bands and things like that. But she was very musically talented. And so she was really involved in that, and he had a band, so that he was involved with his band. So one night after practice, they going out to a date, and they used to ride to the restaurants, and all of them would just kind of carpool down to the restaurants and stuff. And while they were at one of the restaurants, I believe they said it was the Shoney's in the Charlotte, Mecklenburg area. And they were sitting there, and he described it as a place where you pull in and ordered from a meter that was right there, and everybody kind of sat there and talked and kind of reminded me of some of the movies you see back in the olden days. If you're talking to this young group here.
It's like a car hop situation.
Like a car hop situation.
Like a Sonic.
Yeah, that's the way he kind of explained it in his email. But anyway, he said that he and another guy got into a heated argument about the horsepower of their vehicles. He had a Dodge Charger, and the other one had a Chevy Malibu.
No car all the way.
So,
Charger.
No car all the way.
An SS. And so they got this thing. So they decided, like all good teenagers back then, we'd just go have a drag race. Right. So they went down and decided they'd go into this neighborhood that was under construction, and it had a road that goes down and makes a U-turn and comes back up the other side. So some of the people had already started building the houses there at the entrance. And so Shirley and this other girl that was with the other gentleman in the other car, they got out, and they were going to race from around and end it right parallel where they were at right then, at the point of the start. It was getting kind of dark, and he said it was kind of hazy. And so Shirley got out of the car and she was running through the backyards, going to the other location to be at the finish line. And there was a clothesline there that she didn't see.
Oh, no.
So she was running wide open and hit the clothesline, and it almost took her head off.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay. So anyway, to make a long story from what he says short, he's walking by the music room one day, and apparently the doors had a glass beside where the door handle was, and you could see into the music room. Mm-hmm. He saw her in a new dress, and she was acting she looked like she was directing an orchestra, and underneath the arm, she saw the tag on the dress, and he thought, that's really weird. And so he opens up the door. When he opens up the door, he looks in. There's nobody there. So during the funeral, they had a closed casket, and he talked to her mother, and her mother had bought her a brand new dress.
Oh.
And he was really interested about this tag. He said, what's about this tag? So he goes to the funeral home, and he finds out that they put the dress on the individual, and or Shirley.
Buried in?
And that's what she was buried in. And apparently they didn't take the tags off of those dresses. They just put her in a dress and put it in the coffin. And so that was really weird, because she was in there in the dress that she was buried in, and he saw her. Yeah. And a friend of his who was with him also caught it out of the corner of his eye. And they both were so scared to tell anybody that they thought that it was all in their heads. They were imagining it.
Yeah.
Well, we can relate to that.
But the strange thing is now they keep hearing her, what sounds like a girl singing in there every once in a while. Like she would go in and practice for the talent show, and they now hear voices in there of a girl singing. So that was his ghost story.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
sad.
So let me get so she was just running, and she got decapitated by a clothesline?
She didn't see the clothesline. She just ran right.
How fast do you have to run to get
I don't
decapitated
know.
by a clothesline?
That's like
when
that
you're
anime
running?
Natura run.
Okay. I have personal experience with this, not me. But Andrew, my sister's ex-husband, he was running after his dog in our backyard, and he clotheslined himself, and it cut his neck. It was one of those old metal clotheslines. Yeah. And we were laughing at him at first, but then when we saw, he was hurt really bad, and he was, just about to cry. And
Doug, we're not doubting your story. We're just
I was just like, wow. It was like, how fast do you have to run?
Not that fast.
Well, it just
Those
depends how you,
clotheslines are sharp.
and they probably had it pretty tight. It's new, and it was really tight. So, but anyway, that was his story, and I appreciate you sending us the email and telling us about your story. And I hope I did it justice because
that's a really sweet, sad.
Sweet, and he says he can't go a day without remembering her. So
that's bittersweet. That's the word. If I can bring up some haunted items, I saw a video about this week that I was like, oh, Bruce needs these. He needs these. There were like 10 of them, but the two that I thought were really interesting one was a wedding gown, and I was like, oh, that's creepy. Like a bride who passed away and left her wedding gown. But the wedding gown was haunted. And then they had haunted bunk beds, and it was two brothers that had passed away in this family, and their bunk beds were haunted. They're like old wooden bunk beds, not like the metal, more modern ones. They're like really old wooden that look like somebody actually built them. But they said that people on the beds like feel, tapped on the head, or sometimes they feel like someone is sitting on the bed when it's like the top bunk and there's no way someone could be there. I think we should get Bruce haunted bunk beds for his birthday next year.
I'm thinking Bruce is thinking, that's just what I need, a haunted bed.
I'd prefer things
Let's keep the poltergeist out my bed.
No, I'm just thinking I'd prefer things that could actually fit in my attic.
We'll make it fit. Haunted gown, though, a haunted wedding gown. If I come across one, I'm getting it for you.
I don't know how to explain that one, but sure.
Okay, guys, I really enjoyed tonight. Appreciate everybody listening in. And for myself,
and Bruce,
and Candace,
and Amanda,
we say good night. Thank you for listening. And good night from Mothman Podcast. We